We're in mantra 11 today. Vidyam cha, yes. Why don't you try saying that with me? Vidyam cha, yes.
Yes.
Tad vedo bhayam saha. Tad
Tad
vedo bhayam.
Vedo Bhayam Saha.
Avidyaya mrityam tirtva.
Avidyaya Mrityam Tirtava.
Vidyaya mritam ashnute. Vidyaya.
Vidyayam Amritam Ashnute.
Very good. Vidyayam chayas.
Vidyayam cha yas.
Tadvido bhayang saha.
Tadvedo Bhayam Saha.
Avidyayam mrityam tirtva.
Avidyaya Mrityam Tirtava.
Vidyayam mritam ashnute.
Vidyayamritam Ashnute.
Once more, let's try it together. Vidyam chayas.
Vidyam cha yas.
Tadvido bhayang saha.
Tadvedo Bhayam Saha.
Avidyayam mrityam tirtva.
Avidyayam Mrityu Tirtava.
Vidyayam mritam ashnute.
Vidyayamritam Ashrute.
Very good. Here are the synonyms. Vidyam, knowledge in fact. Cha, and. Avidyam, nescience. Cha, and. Ya, a person. Who. Tat, that. Veda, knows. Ubhayam, both. Saha, simultaneously. Avidyaya, by culture of nescience. Notice vidyam on the first line and avidyaya. By putting the prefix a in front of a word, it negates it. So vidyam becomes avidya in this word, avidyaya, by culture of nescience. Mrityam, repeated death. Tirtva, transcending. Vidyaya, by culture of knowledge. Amritam, deathlessness. Asnute, enjoys. Mantra 11 translation. One who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. One who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. Let's continue on for just a moment. Here again are those synonyms. Now I'm showing them to you again because I've taken the liberty in this next slide to do a simplified translation of the verse based on the synonyms. It looks something like this. Those who acquire knowledge of both matter, avidya, and spirit, vidya, can escape death and achieve immortality. It's just a straightening out or a streamlining of the language ever so slightly that points to an interesting development in the progress of the text. You'll recall that in Mantra 9, the speaker talks about cultivating avidya and going to the darkest regions of creation, that this focus on ourselves as strictly material is a pathway to a very dark place. And then in Mantra 10, the speaker continues on the same thing by saying that one result is obtained by studying vidya, true knowledge, and another from avidya. So he's saying there's two different results here. Now here in this verse, the speaker seems to be taking something of a middle ground, a kind of reconciling of these extremes by saying acquiring knowledge of both may be the best way to progress spiritually. Now, we'll need to talk about that a little bit. It raises a question: what spiritual benefit could there possibly be studying the material world? Why bother with matter at all? If our goal is to achieve knowledge of ourselves as eternal beings, why get distracted? We're reading that this can be dangerous. Well, it is, we learn from the commentaries by Prabhupada, a mistake to think that the material world is somehow disconnected from the rest of creation. And in fact, in the Bhakti tradition, the real challenge is precisely this: to study the points of tangency between the teachings of Isopanishad, the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, the teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the world around us. In preparation for this discussion this evening, I spoke with a couple of very dear friends of mine. Ray Brown and his partner, Wanda Aiken, are legal representatives, lawyers for victims of the Darfur genocide. They concentrate on human rights issues, and their careers are dedicated to assisting victims of genocides and war crimes and crimes against humanity. And they're also leading figures in the developing area of law related to assisting businesses with the requirements for human rights compliance. So this is really at the core of their legal careers. And you see the logo for their project called the International Justice Project. And I encourage you to take a look at what they're doing there. It's very important work in terms of achieving attention and more resources for domestic and international judicial forums on human rights. I called them, I asked them, does this pandemic that we're confronting now globally, has that had an effect at all on the war crimes tribunals, on war crimes themselves, on your work in The Hague with the International Criminal Court and elsewhere? In other words, does confronting a global challenge, a larger issue that threatens all, does that situation in any way alter hostilities on a personal or communal or national level? And Ray's response to me was that he hadn't thought of it in quite that way. He said he doesn't believe that just being confronted with something that is a threat to all, perpetrator and victim alike, does anything to resolve human rights violations or excuse them or make them go away. He said, however, that it does put them in a broader context, that not only crimes against humanity, genocide, and other such personal transgressions, but also if we look at those transgressions within the context of, let's say, the water crisis or healthcare crisis or poverty or hunger, the larger framework, he said, can galvanize energies. It can create a common ground among people who have been until now preoccupied with their own tragic past. So let me connect the dots here for you. To the extent that we see ourselves facing not just a political challenge, that is to say, avidya, the affairs of the material world, to the extent that we see ourselves facing as well a spiritual challenge, that we recognize that we are forced now under these circumstances to fully cooperate, then yes, it can alter the dialogue. Let me see. Are we back on the screen here? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So at least now there's a chance within this broader issue of something that transcends our moment, our concerns, there's a possibility to achieve a willingness to work together. And this, to my mind, is what it means to cultivate vidya and avidya side by side. Not just looking at the obvious. When we talk about avidya, the sense of that term isn't sensual pleasures and the obvious distractions. Avidya also means anything that has to do with the affairs of the temporal world. If we examine those affairs and look at them from the context of not just a political challenge or an economic challenge, but a spiritual challenge, then the combination of that view of the material and the spiritual works harmoniously for our progress. The example that Mustafa Cherish once shared with me. Mustafa Cherish was the chief cleric of Bosnia, the chief imam there. And he said, our position today is something like the animals on Noah's Ark. Animals who might otherwise eat each other, devour each other, fight to the death, are in a situation where they must learn to live together, where they must learn to share a space and to care for one another, because our existence now depends on facilitating the existence of those around us. So that's, I thought, a useful analogy for an understanding of this instruction of Isopanishad to pursue vidya and avidya together. Take the details of each and every day in the larger context of this too has a role to play in my spiritual journey, in my path to Krishna. This also has a role to play. That if I see Krishna in this other person's heart, no matter how much I may disagree with this person, no matter how much we may on a material level be enemies, that informs whatever service I might do for them. There was an article that I found fascinating a couple of years back in the Wall Street Journal. It was the story of a woman police officer who was called upon to intervene in hostage situations. When negotiations failed, she would be the one to come in and often have to take down the perpetrator, the hostage taker, in order to save the innocent hostage. And then this officer discovered Buddhism and became a practicing Buddhist, and described for the journalist, the author of this article, how very often now, through her studies of the Buddha nature and an appreciation for seeing oneself in the other, she's found ways of negotiating way different from what she learned in class, way different from what's there in the standard manuals of hostage negotiation, such that she was able to establish a rapport with these hostage takers that previously she was incapable of doing. So the spiritual path, the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, can have a direct impact on our behavior in the material world. So with that, I'd like to open this conversation up to you and some of your thoughts and insights. The important point, I think, is to see that vidya and avidya, knowledge of ourselves as spiritual beings and our position as embodied beings in the temporal material world, are not separate or inimical. They work together to help us progress within the life we have. All right, here we go. Mike asks a very puzzling question: a priori and a posteriori knowledge. Mike, why don't you explain for our guest what you mean by that?
Hello.
Hi.
I meant, does it relate at all to, I guess what I'm using are more like Western philosophical terms, but like, knowledge gained through sense data, empirical knowledge, as opposed to that kind of knowledge that we have. I think Plato sort of had this as an example where he's able to teach sort of advanced geometric sort of principles to someone with no knowledge of mathematics just by asking a few simple questions, sort of revealing that the knowledge is almost innate. I mean, obviously, from a Platonic point of view, the knowledge comes from somewhere special, somewhere divine, and we're sort of just catching glimpses of it by doing work with one another. But I was just kind of wondering, when you talked about the vidya and the avidya, if there's some sort of a relation between those conceptions of knowledge, or those means of learning, means of understanding and relating to the world.
Sure. The Platonic ideal, of course, is that there are these concepts, these notions of beauty, truth, the real, that exist separate and apart from our own perceptions of them. And our challenge is to discover them, that the human journey is to discover these absolute ideals. If there is a correspondence between the Platonic ideals and the Vedic ideals, it's that we are not ourselves the originator of those concepts. That's common to both perspectives, that there is a reality that exists separate from us. To simply say that, I've created my reality, I've created my world, is very short-sighted. There is a universe that exists out there objectively, separate and apart from our perceptions of it. That's a Vedic premise, that we are called upon to discover a reality which we have not created, but which God has created. So there may be some parallels in that sense. I think the difference might be in the way to realize those highest ideals. The Vedic formula, the bhakti formula, is begin from a position of humility, begin from a position of self-reform. These beads that devotees wear represent a vow. Before one can receive diksha or initiation into the bhakti tradition, an aspiring devotee takes a vow in front of the teacher, the guru, and the fire, and the assembly of disciples, that there will be certain behavioral protocols respected. The diet will be abuse-free, harm-free diet, that one will abstain from sexual relations outside of one's partnership, one's life partnership, that there will be no frivolous gambling or wasting of money and time, and no intoxicants, nothing that will dull the senses. So there are certain behavioral guidelines, which yesterday we discussed, are not merely principles of morality. We have to be in the guna of goodness, the mode of goodness, in order to qualify to receive awareness of these higher ideals. So they're principles of spiritual knowledge, of acquiring knowledge as well. Said in a different way, you cannot separate yoga from reform of behavior. There's no possibility of progressing in yoga without progressing in one's personal habits and morals and perspectives on the world. So that might be a difference between the two. Yeah, but it's a wonderful question. Thank you. Here's a comment from Jasmine. I think that aromatic flowers, delicious fruits, bhakti music, scenic landscapes, all material add dimension of beauty to aspects of human existence. Well, that's lovely. That's practically verses from the Bhagavad Gita. In the 9th chapter and the 12th chapter, Krishna describes for Arjuna how Arjuna can see God in the world around him. And he uses these very same examples that The jasmine is offered here. So far as flowers, Krishna tells Arjuna, I am flower-bearing spring. This is a wonderful time of year to go out and discover God in nature, in the world around you. Fruits, Krishna describes for Arjuna, if you offer me a fruit, I will appear before you. I will accept it and reciprocate with you in loving exchange. Bhakti music, yes, of course, the sound that Nada Brahma, God in sound, the music of mantra and kirtan is non-different from Krishna himself. And the landscape, yes, all of the things that Jasmine has suggested here are ways of seeing God through the material world, through that which our senses can perceive. There's another example of cultivating vidya and avidya simultaneously. You can't call a flower spiritual. You can call it beautiful. You can call it subtle material. But what makes it spiritual is the connection you make with the creator of that flower. I remember one time being with Prabhupada in Paris and asking him, what is art? He said, art. Think of the artist. And he took a rose from a vase on his desk and he twirled it between his fingers and smelled it. He said, just see the artistry of Krishna. He said, there are so many fragrances in the earth. How did this flower know to take this one particular rose scent? So that kind of, if you will, expression of the artistry of God, now you're bringing vidya and avidya together. Here's a comment. What about Bhagavad Gita 7:4? Earth, water, fire, ether, mind, these 8 comprise my separated material existence. How does this relate to vidya and avidya? Well, there you have it. Bhumi raponulo vayu kamanu buddhareva cha. Krishna is describing that the material elements are my energy. Here he is directly in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, giving us the formula for connecting vidya and avidya. If you know that this energy, this material energy, while it may be provisional, it's still the energy of God, then everything you see can become an inspiration. We touched on this when we were discussing the deity in the temple, the Archamurti. Seeing the deity is seeing Krishna. For someone who is fully aware, fully self-realized, he sees Krishna everywhere. There's another verse in Gita, I forget the Sanskrit, where Krishna says, one who sees me in everything and everything in me is never lost to me, nor am I ever lost to that person. That's spiritual vision.
Speaking of avidya, and I don't know, this may sound funny, but I'm kind of serious. I find that the major obstacles in my spiritual life these days go by the names of Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. I'm having a real difficult time seeing Krishna in there. How can I see God in people like this?
With great difficulty.
Thank you. Gotta go.
Yeah, honestly, there are times when I feel your pain. You know, I like most of you, I would imagine I get my news from the cable stations or the Times or wherever, and you know, I say to myself, okay, you know what? I'll see Krishna in the heart of everybody else. A little carve out here for this guy. But that's silly. That's foolish. We are compelled by our faith and our knowledge of the teachings to recognize that when we turn away from our true spiritual nature, we can fall very far and sound very stupid. It's that simple. What we may be witnessing is an extreme case, of material conditioning. But I would caution you, and I'm preaching to myself here, so I would caution all of us here to try really hard to hate the sin and not the sinner. It's difficult, and wrongdoing should not be tolerated. I think that maybe that's the difference. Just as Arjuna had to pick up his weapons and fight, the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita was not that Krishna crossed the battlefield and embraced his enemies and said, "Oh, my brother, let us sit down and have a kirtan and prasadam together." No, they were evil. They were wrongdoers, and they had to be stopped. But there is a way to do that. There's a way to do everything within devotional context. What is the way to fight? What is the way to bring down an evildoer? You know the answer. It's with compassion. It's knowing that whatever can be done to stop evil from happening must be done. But in the pursuit of that end of evil, we do not have the right to either condemn another soul or to cause more harm than absolutely necessary. That's the definition of a spiritual warrior, of a Brahminical Maharata, is one who has this in proper balance. Here again, vidya and avidya working together. Yes, this person is wrong. Yes, this person is dangerous. But this person is also a soul. I can be of greatest service to this person by getting him to stop what he's doing, because he's creating a royal road to hell for himself, and he's hurting everyone around him in the process. So to do it with our eyes open to what's going on in the background. It doesn't mean you don't act. It doesn't mean that we refrain from bringing down evildoers, but we do it from a position of compassion and knowledge and understanding. Thank you. Thank you all. We're once again at the end of our mirth and merriment surrounding the teachings of Isopanishad. And I thank you all for your company. Sorry if I don't mean to get too heavy, but sometimes the material is very deep and very beautiful. So thank you all very much. And I hope you have a pleasant evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Let's offer the Vaishnav Pranam together. Vansakalpaturu Vyascha Kripa Sindhu Bheva Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namah. Night all.